The movie opens with a montage of newsreels summarizing an alien invasion of Earth. An asteroid carrying an alien race called the Mimics has crashed into Europe and quickly devastates the continent. Just when things look hopeless, an allied army of humans utilizing new mechanized suits wins a major battle in Verdun, and a special forces soldier named Sergeant Rita Vertasky is hailed as a hero after being credited with hundreds of Mimic kills. She becomes an instant icon and a recruiting boon for the human military, as the united human armies try to use the momentum for Verdun to launch a multi-pronged final assault on Europe. One of the talking heads on the newsreels selling Vertasky and the war effort is Major William Cage of the US Army. Cage awakens from a doze on a helicopter trip to London in the UK, the morning of the day before the operation to retake Europe. He meets with the commander of the Western Allies, General Brigham, assuming the general wants Cage to help him boost his public image or prepare for a post-war political career. Instead, the general orders Cage to accompany the first wave of Allied troops to land in France and provide ground coverage for the media. Cage, who is a ROTC cadet in college and has no experience in the field, tries various tactics to avoid the deployment, culminating with trying to blackmail the general via the media. At first the general seems to relent, but has his guards taser Cage instead. Cage wakes up on a pile of duffel bags in the afternoon at Heathrow Airport, which has been turned into a military base. A sergeant shoves boots into his hands and calling him maggot before another sergeant named Farrell takes over. It turns out General Brigham sent orders to Farrell stating Cage had tried to desert and had now been demoted from an officer to private. Cage is assigned to a band of eccentric soldiers, J Squad, who are caught gambling by Farrell when Cage is introduced to them. Farrell forces J Squad to eat the cards they are gambling with and then instructs them to get Cage ready to deploy with them tomorrow. Cage is immediately taken by the squad for physical training. The next day is Invasion Day and Cage is a nervous wreck. He is fitted into a suit and the members of J Squad don't even bother teaching him how to take his weapon off safe mode as they believe he will die quickly. As soon as they are about to drop from aircraft onto the French coast, however, the back of their airship explodes and the squad drops down prematurely. Even though the operation to retake Europe was supposed to be a surprise attack, the Mimics are completely prepared in ambush and slaughter the humans. Sergeant Vertasky also lands on the beach but is killed within minutes. The surviving members of J Squad are all killed rapidly. Still shell-shocked and about to die, Cage grabs a claymore mine as a giant blue Mimic jumps on him. The ensuing blast kills the Mimic and Cage, but not before the blue Mimic's blood seeps onto Cage. Cage awakes in a panic on top of the duffel bags, with the same sergeant calling him maggot and Farrell again taking him to J Squad. Despite his desperate attempt to explain what is happening and that the Mimics will ambush everyone, nobody believes him. Each time, he is deployed and dies, only to wake up again on the duffel bags. With each loop, he becomes slightly more adept at trying to save the members of J Squad and Vertasky, but the Mimics are too numerous and always kill everyone. In one loop, he survives long enough to tell Vertasky that he is stuck in some time loop. Recognizing what happened, Vertasky tells Cage, "Find me when you wake up," before they both die again. Cage awakens on the duffel bags again, but starts cooperating with Sergeant Farrell and J Squad in order to buy himself time to find Vertasky. After several failed attempts in the base at slipping away, Cage finally manages to get away from PT and finds Vertasky in a training base surrounded by training drones. The Special Forces soldiers are all hostile towards him and Vertasky greets him rudely, but when he explains Vertasky asked for him, she whisks him away to a weapons building bay where her acquaintance Carter works. Once there, they go to a back room and Cage gets an explanation from Vertasky and Carter. Vertasky was also stuck in a time loop in Verdun, explaining how she came to be able to kill hundreds of Mimics single-handedly by the final loop. The loop was created by the blood of the large blue alpha Mimic. Ordinary Mimics are human-sized and orange, but once the looper receives a human blood transfusion, the loop is broken and the person will die permanently. As such, Vertasky instructs Cage to always make sure he dies fully instead of being accidentally resuscitated like she was post-Verdun, an act which broke her out of the loop cycle. Carter was formerly a researcher in General Brigham HQ, but his theory that all Mimics are just neural manifestations of one overmind Omega alien creature led him to create a device that could locate the Omega if inputted into an Alpha, which also led to him being fired. Cage tries to process all of this, but Vertasky states that for them to find the Omega first, they must survive the invasion tomorrow. She then proceeds to train Cage, killing him a few times when he is injured so that he awakes on the duffels and starts over again. Cage and Vertasky become much improved in combat on the beach, but despite everything, they both keep dying in cage loops over and over. Cage grows attracted to Vertasky, and watching her die over and over again also starts to take an emotional toll. Cage receives a mental vision in one loop that the Omega is in a dam in Germany. Vertasky and Carter believe the visions are due to Cage in effect being an alpha after being infected with the blue blood, and that the alphas and the Omega have the power to manipulate time and perception. As such, Cage and Vertasky focus their efforts on surviving on the invasion beach and cutting inland to Germany. After multiple failures and deaths, Cage and Vertasky finally make it inland. During the trips they bond, with Cage noting down the details of the things Vertasky says on each loop. In one loop, Vertasky mentions having a significant other in Verdun who she had to watch die hundreds of times until she was out of the loop and he was dead for good. After they find a helicopter in a farmhouse, Vertasky realizes Cage is trying to coax her to stay in the farmhouse while he goes alone and confronts the mimics. Cage admits they have looped to the farmhouse multiple times already, but every single time Vertasky dies, so he's trying to spare her from dying again by going alone. Shocked and offended, she intentionally gets them killed. In the following loop, Cage decides to not seek out Vertasky and instead escapes the base. Cage eventually succeeds in making it to the German dam alone, but finds nothing and is almost imprisoned by the mimics before he manages to drown himself. In the next loop, Cage, Vertasky, and Carter put the pieces together and figure out the visions, and Vertasky's success in Verdun was all a ruse by the Omega mimic Overmind. The Omega had let the humans win at Verdun in order to lure the humans into invading Europe. With no other leads, the device Carter made which got him fired is their last shot. Vertasky and Cage switch focus to getting the device, which is in the possession of General Brigham. After several fatal failures, they manage to get the device and stab it into Cage's leg. Cage then sees the true location of the Omega, in the Louvre Museum in Paris. After seeing this, their getaway car crashes. Cage awakens strapped to a hospital gurney, under arrest. He realizes he is out of the loop now as he was given a blood transfusion following the car crash. Vertasky breaks the two of them out, but with no more loops left and only several hours before the doomed invasion, Cage decides to go back to the base and find the misfit J-Squad to take them to Paris. Cage's now intimate knowledge of J-Squad and Vertasky credibility convinces J-Squad, and they all take an aircraft and fly to Paris. Once at the Louvre, the mimics crash their airship and in the ensuing firefight half of J-Squad are killed. Cage, Vertasky, and the three remaining J-Squad members decide to use the remaining engine power to slide the airship into the Louvre and detonate grenades to kill the Omega. The rest of J-Squad sacrifice themselves in the slide, and Cage and Vertasky make it into the museum. Once there, Vertasky tells Cage she will distract a patrolling alpha mimic while he will go and detonate an explosive belt on the Omega, which is submerged underwater at the bottom of the Louvre. As Vertasky says neither one of them will survive the ordeal, they share a kiss. Cage dives underwater to get to the Omega. The Omega senses Cage and sends the Alpha back to catch him. The Alpha dives after Cage and stabs him, but Cage pulls all the explosive pins and drops the belt into the Omega. The Omega explodes and dies, and all the mimics die with it. As Cage dies, the Omega's blood seeps into him. Cage wakes up shocked and finds himself on the helicopter trip to London from the morning before the invasion. He lands and sees on the news that after mysterious explosions in Paris, the mimics have all died off and the human forces will commence sweeping through Europe the next day. All the members of J-Squad are seen alive and well as Cage arrives in the base. Cage goes to find Vertasky. Thanks for watching. If you like this movie recap, remember to subscribe to the Sci-Fi Nerd for more movies like this. See you soon.